Jesus Trilogy, Book 2, Then There Were Two, Chapter 9, Part A. Events in the church the previous day were still fresh in Jesus' mind as he, his wife Mary, and Mother Mary made their way up the winding cobblestone trail to the hill called Zara, where Abel's funeral was to be held. Jesus held Mary's hand in his left and his mother's with his right. The ladies were dressed in black. Jesus had wanted to wear white, but he was a pallbearer and had to wear black, or Mary said she would kill him. So not wanting to die, he obeyed as he always did. He wasn't sure why funerals had to be so somber. Mourners and all their weeping turned his stomach. Would not the dead rise again in the resurrection? Sure, they would be missed, but someday soon they would all be reunited in the courts of heaven. The scrolls foretold this fact. Or was it the new earth? In any event, wouldn't it be better to celebrate the life of a man who died? Why not celebrate all the good deeds he had performed? Believing in this viewpoint left Jesus in a chorus of one. He had learned to keep some of his thinking to himself. His views often created way too many waves. Recently his reading had taken on a more serious nature. In Isaiah he had begun to read of an entity called the Messiah that was destined to die for the sin of mankind. This was true, and he was that Messiah which he now believed to be true. Was he to die? And if so, when? Apart from his discussions with Mary and his studies, nothing seemed to be happening on the Messiah front. He was working very hard this summer and doing better financially. There would be enough money for Mary to go to university, and he knew she would go. He knew in his heart it was meant to be. His mother had been denied that opportunity, and he was not about to have the person he loved the most in all the world be denied anything if he could help it. He had not told her he would have the money. It was her decision, and he would let her make it, but he knew she would decide in the affirmative. Ouch! What's the matter, baby? My ankle. I twisted it, Mary said. Where? Right there. Oh, it hurts. Can you walk? Mary, his mother asked. I don't know. I think so. She put her foot down on the ground, but as soon as she put weight on it, she would yelp out in pain. You two go on ahead. I'll sit here for a few minutes. It will ease in a minute or two, and then I'll be along. We'll wait for you, Jesus answered. No, you've got to be there on time. You're a pallbearer. I can't leave you. What if it doesn't get better? You could sit here for hours. I'll be okay. I can't let you be here alone. I'll stay with her, Jesus' mother Mary said. You go ahead. But Jesus would have none of it. He picked up his wife in his strong, light arms and began to carry her up the trail. He still had several hundred yards to go until he reached the top, and the steepest part remained. Jesus gritted his teeth and headed up the path. Mary was no little girl, 5 foot 9 inches tall and 135 pounds. But he was strong, and despite the hot sun, he continued upward. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, and his breathing increased in frequency and intensity. But he trudged on. He began to tire noticeably, and his pace began to slow. He gritted his teeth even more. He wasn't sure he could go any farther, and he began to feel a little lightheaded. Suddenly there was a tap on his shoulder. Need some help, pal? Jesus looked up and saw the hulking figure of his cousin Johnny standing before him. Yeah, I guess so. Jesus eased Mary down and between gaffs said, Mary sprained her ankle and I want her to wait and not in football shape anymore, are we? No, I guess not, Jesus said, now sitting cross-legged on the ground. Let cousin Johnny help. With that, Johnny whisked Mary up in his massive arms and carried her the rest of the way up the hill. He set her in a chair next to his wife, Diana. Mary, Jesus' mother, sat next to her. They were in the third row behind Barabbas' family and relatives. Jesus and Johnny went over to the area behind the altar to get briefed as to what they were to do as pallbearers. Judas was also one of the pallbearers. Neither Jesus nor Johnny had seen Judas since graduation. Where you been keeping yourself, Judas boy? Johnny asked. Around. Jesus expected that answer out of Judas. And you? Judas asked. You missed my wedding, Johnny said. Oh yeah, how's the little woman? Judas held his hands up to his chest as if holding two melons. Diane was in the common vernacular built. She was 5'2", but had large breasts, larger than any young woman in Nazareth. Judas figured they would sag when she got older. His Gentile, on the other hand, had perfect breasts along with everything else. He figured even when she was old, she would still have a perfect figure. With all the new makeup available, she could stay beautiful forever. Judas was careful to keep his opinions about Diana's figure to himself. He was sure Johnny's temper had not mellowed even with marriage. Sorry I couldn't make your wedding. Business, you know. That's okay. By the way, when is your... We're still working on a date. Well, let us know. Have to juggle work, genteel, school, relatives. Johnny and Jesus knew Judas only had foster parents, but said nothing. Judas was Judas. You had to take everything he said with a grain of salt, but they were used to this and still cared about him as a friend. Neither Johnny nor Jesus knew what it would be like to have foster parents. They might have developed worse traits than Judas if they had been in his shoes. What always puzzled them about Judas was that Judas didn't seem to realize he was always bending the truth. They assumed it must be just a habit, the design of which put him, Judas, always in the best possible light. Never said where you're working, Johnny asked. Oh, here and there. I've got this one connection that should get me into the banking business, but it takes time, you know. In the business world, you have to work your way up. With my talent for numbers and people skills, I'll make it. Sure you will, pal, Johnny said, half in jest, but Judas didn't pick up on it. Jesus did, and suspected Johnny's theory might be correct. The three listened as the funeral director gave instructions, and then they all went back to the roped-off area and took their positions next to the casket. The music from the harpist began to overshadow the constant drone of the mourners. The 6 pallbearers picked up the casket. It was made of mahogany wood, inlaid with ivory and gold. Judas wondered where Barabbas' family had gotten the money for such a lavish casket. It seemed like such a waste. In an hour, the beautiful casket would lay in a hole in the ground, never to be seen by human eyes again. Judas could think of much better uses for that kind of money. He himself preferred cremation. No mess, no fuss, no expense. Just as the 6 pallbearers were about to advance down the center aisle, the music abruptly stopped. King Herod was perched in his royal sedan, far to the right of the altar. He did not get out. The 4 bearers of his sedan stood at attention despite the increasing heat, but now all heads turned and looked back to see another sedan coming down the center aisle. There was a murmur from the crowd. It was of all people Pilate, the governor of Judea, and his son Pontius too. There were 8 soldiers carrying his sedan, and they perched it to the left of the altar area. These 8 bearers all stood at attention. Interestingly, King Herod had a more ornate sedan than that of Pilate. What is more, the 8 bearers of the Pilate sedan did not set his sedan down on the ground. Rather, they held it in their 8 pairs of strong arms, and would do so for the entire service. No Roman governor would be contaminated by the soil of the Hebrew dead.